Chief Judge of the New York Court of Appeals in the state of New York.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Court of Appeals for the 2025 State of the Judiciary. Please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance and the National Anthem. It is my pleasure to welcome 6-year-old Luke Sherwin to lead us in the pledge. Luke is in the first grade, and he's joined today by his parents, Kate and Stephen Sherwin. Stephen, his father, recently stepped into the role of Chief Court Attorney for the central staff here at the Court of Appeals. Luke, whenever you're ready.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Luke. Beautifully done. So, although in past years we have had Sergeant Peter Robinson of the 8th Judicial District to sing the national anthem, Sergeant Robinson can't sing for us any longer because he is now Lieutenant Robinson. He still has the same marvelous tenor. Lieutenant? He is a little taller than me.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you, Lieutenant Robinson, and congratulations once again. Please be seated. Seated on the bench are my colleagues on the Court of Appeals, Senior Associate Judge Jenny Rivera, and Associate Judges Michael Garcia, Madeline Singas, Anthony Canataro, Shirley Troutman, and Caitlin Halligan. And we all want to welcome you here to our beautiful courtroom. Alongside me are Chief Administrative Judge of the Unified Court System, Joe Zayas, and the presiding justices of 3 of the 4 appellate divisions, the Honorable Diane Renwick, Honorable Elizabeth Gary, and Honorable Gerald Whalen. The Honorable Hector LaSalle is under the weather and couldn't be with us today, but sends his regrets. I would also like to welcome some of our honored guests from our co-equal branches of government with whom we are privileged to work for the betterment of all New Yorkers. Our Solicitor General, Barbara Underwood, Judiciary Chair Brad Hoylman-Siegel, Counsel to the Speaker, Miguelina Camilo, and Executive Counsel to the Speaker, Howard Vargas. Welcome all. Finally, I must thank a few members of the Court of Appeals family who worked tirelessly to make today possible. Jay Kemprowski and his team who coordinated the technology, Jim Vandeloo and his team who beautifully arranged the courtroom for all of you, Al Baker and his communications department for creating print and digital materials to inform and engage the public about today's event, Chief George Alamas and his team for coordinating all the security aspects, and Ann Byer, who each year at this time doesn't sleep for several days to make sure that everything and everyone is exactly where they're supposed to be. So last year, I delivered a State of the Judiciary address that was unorthodox in both format and content. I shared the podium with several New Yorkers who, though charged with serious criminal offenses, had stories with happy endings because of their diversion into some of our more than 340 problem-solving courts. They had been diverted away from incarceration and into productive, fulfilling lives, giving back to their communities by helping others with similar troubles. From their stories and from the generally spectacular results of problem-solving courts statewide, I drew my unorthodox message that all of New York's courts should consider themselves problem solvers. I urge those of us privileged enough to serve from the bench to ask what decision is best, not merely which party is right, to think about courts as similar to our other branches of government, institutions that attempt to make decisions that will improve the lives of those we serve. Support for transformation of our courts into problem solvers was also the major focus of the Unified Court System's budget request last year. We sought and received funding for the enhancement and expansion of our long-neglected family courts, which deal with delicate situations involving the safety and success of children and families, as well as funding to augment specialty courts throughout the state, including court services for emerging adults and mental health court participants. More broadly, last year's highlights extend to areas as diverse as expansion of statewide e-filing, landmark legislation to help keep judges safe amid rising threats, expansion of our communications department with a focus on informing and engaging the public, the creation of a division of alternative dispute resolution, deployment of an equal justice coordinator in each judicial district in the state, modernization of criminal courtrooms around the state and participation with district attorneys' offices, training and graduation of 4 classes of new court officers, and piloting an advanced platform for virtual court appearances. For those who want to see what our Division of Court Modernization has accomplished, we are posting an accompaniment to the State of the Judiciary, an 8-minute video capturing highlights statewide. I thank the Governor and the Legislature for their continued partnership with the Judiciary and for their thoughtful consideration of and engagement with the programmatic requests in our budget. We at the Unified Court System are fortunate to collaborate with coordinate branches of government that recognize the need to support alternatives to the traditional paradigms, so that together we can provide better results for all New Yorkers. My leadership team and I, as well as the judges and the thousands of dedicated employees of the Unified Court System, have been hard at work to bring our courts out of the past and into the future. But the past, not the future, better describes our criminal justice system today. The basic model, identify, apprehend, and punish the wrongdoer, is the approach we inherited from Europe and dates back to the codes of Hammurabi and Ur-Nammu. Mercifully, we no longer put the heads of criminals on stakes or cut off the hands of thieves, but let's consider how well the traditional model is working. The United States leads the world in the total number of people incarcerated. There are about 2 million people in our jails and prisons. We have only 5% of the world's population, but about 20% of the world's prison population. We are a world leader in incarceration rate per capita. Every single U.S. state incarcerates more people per capita than almost any other democracy on earth. New York State has a higher per capita incarceration rate than Russia. What do we know about the people who are incarcerated? According to the American Psychological Association, 54% of those incarcerated in state prisons have mental health issues, as do 64% of those held in jails. According to Comptroller Thomas DiNapoli, more than half of New York's jail population in 2021 had a mental health diagnosis. We also know that our penal system is ill-equipped to provide mental health services to incarcerated people, and incarceration itself most often exacerbates existing or creates new mental health issues. Racial and ethnic disparities also plague the current model. The felony conviction rate is significantly higher for New Yorkers of color than their white peers. According to data tracked by the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services, those disparities persist through felony sentencing. As a result, although African Americans comprise about 18% of New York's general population, they make up nearly half of our prison population. Those identifying as Hispanic or Latino are also overrepresented in the prison population. The incarcerated population is also getting older due to longer sentences. In 2007, the average minimum sentence for incarcerated New Yorkers was just under 9 years. In 2021, it was 4 years longer, just under 13 years. And although abundant research shows that criminality declines as people age, New York's prison population is getting older and older. In 2008, only 12% of incarcerated people in New York were over the age of 50. In 2021, the percentage over 50 has doubled to nearly a quarter of those in New York prisons. What do we get from all this incarceration? It doesn't make us safer. Studies have shown that as our prison population went up, the crime rate also rose. The United States has one of the highest recidivism rates worldwide, at least double that of most European countries, where a combination of rehabilitation-focused policies and social reintegration efforts contributes to lower rearrest rates. Our higher level of incarceration is tremendously costly. According to Comptroller DiNapoli, the annual cost to incarcerate one person in New York more than quadrupled in the last decade, from an annual cost of $81,000 in 2011 to more than $250,000 in 2021. And those numbers account only for the portion of the costs covered by the Department of Corrections budget. If you also add the other state costs like benefits and pensions for the staff, the annual cost per incarcerated person in 2021 was well over $500,000, or about $1,500 per incarcerated person per day. The direct monetary costs of incarceration does not begin to capture the vast social and economic costs, which include disrupted families and communities, myriad barriers to employment and education, a reduction in lifetime earnings, the permanent loss of voting rights, and the ubiquitous stigma of a criminal conviction, costs disproportionately borne by low-income communities, which reverberate through generations. Put simply, our criminal justice system isn't working. Maybe it hasn't really ever worked. Prolonged incarceration is very expensive, and it does not make us safer. It entrenches poverty, perpetuates cycles of violence, and harms many of the New Yorkers we are trying to protect and serve. Some scholars liken New York's criminal justice system to a highway that ends in incarceration. Affordable housing and community services might allow someone to exit safely at exit 1, before any interaction with law enforcement or the courts. Treatment services for mental health and substance use disorders might help someone get off at exit 2, before an arrest or criminal charges are brought. Our problem-solving courts might help someone get off at exit 3, whether before or after conviction. As public servants operating parts of New York's criminal justice system, our job is to help as many people safely exit the highway as possible, safely for themselves and for the public. And the earlier along the road they can exit safely, the better. But what should lie at the end of the highway, when an individual has missed all the exits, has been arrested, charged, convicted, sentenced, and incarcerated? How then does a just and effective criminal justice system respond? You might ask, what does over-incarceration have to do with the courts? Isn't that an issue for the other branches of government to resolve? I have two answers. First, separation of powers does not mean that the three branches of government cannot work together to better society. All three branches of New York government work to create and implement the Clean Slate Act, which provides that eligible conviction records will be sealed when certain conditions are met, enabling persons convicted of crimes a better chance for safe reintegration into society. And all three branches are working with the Center for Justice Innovation to reimagine family court and the ways in which families in distress receive help from the state, including when there is involvement with the criminal justice system. My second answer is this: over-incarceration has everything to do with the courts. No prosecutor, no jury, no legislator or executive branch official imposed a prison sentence. Everyone sentenced to prison in New York was sentenced by a judge of the unified court system. In pursuit of last year's theme of enhanced diversion, the unified court system has been working to refine legislation sponsored by Senator Ramos and Assemblymember Souffrant Forrest to expand diversion and treatment programs for people with mental health disorders and other disabilities. And in pursuit of this year's theme, we are working to refine legislation colloquially called the Second Look Act, sponsored by Senator Julia Salazar and Assemblymember Latrice Walker, which would allow those serving long prison sentences to demonstrate to a judge that their continued incarceration is no longer justified. As Chief Administrative Judge Joseph Zayas wrote in the Law Journal last month, many people who commit crimes are not incorrigible or beyond the capacity for change and redemption. They may have been young and reckless and in the wrong place at the wrong time, or addicted to drugs, or suffering from an untreated mental illness. Both of those pieces of legislation fundamentally embody the problem-solving ethos we want to instill deeply in the courts of this state. They propose human-centric, community-oriented solutions that have the potential simultaneously to reduce crime and save taxpayer dollars. As was the case last year, my introductory remarks are the least important part of today's program. We will all have a far greater appreciation of the problems and solutions after hearing from today's guests. Daniel F. Marticello III, the Commissioner of the New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. Christopher Martinez, who has served 23 years in prison and remains incarcerated. Mujahideen Muhammad, who served 24 and a half years in prison and was released 10 months ago. Jarrell Daniels, who served 6 years in prison and was released in 2018. And Tammy Eldridge, who has served 25 years in prison and remains incarcerated. Mr. Martinez, Mr. Muhammad, Mr. Daniels, and Ms. Eldridge all were convicted of very serious crimes. Mr. Martinez and Ms. Eldridge, who remain incarcerated with no end in sight, are here through the extraordinary efforts and extraordinary and unprecedented efforts of Commissioner Marticello and his staff. So let me begin by introducing Commissioner Marticello. He began his career with the then New York State Department of Correctional Services in May of 1997 as a corrections officer. Over the years, he's held a variety of roles in the department. In 2023, he assumed oversight of the department as acting commissioner and was subsequently nominated by Governor Hochul and confirmed by the New York State Senate with overwhelming support as commissioner just this last May. He is the first former corrections officer to be ever appointed commissioner. During my visits to prisons, whenever the commissioner's name came up, whether I was speaking to an incarcerated person or to a DOCS employee, the uniform sentiment was that Commissioner Marticello is unlike any other commissioner they have known. He is an unrelenting ally in the cause to enhance public safety by focusing on rehabilitation to reduce incarceration, enhance the prospect for social integration, and decrease recidivism. Commissioner?
Good afternoon. I'm Daniel Marticello, Commissioner of the New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision, and I'd like to thank Chief Judge Wilson for having me here today to highlight our partnership and discuss some of the work being done in the correctional and judicial systems. It is truly an honor to speak at this momentous occasion and hear about the state and future of New York's judiciary. The judiciary and DOCS are important pillars of the state's criminal justice system. As a department, we strive to fulfill our responsibility with respect and humanity, while ensuring the individuals under our care have access to opportunities to better themselves and prepare for their eventual return to the community. Despite these efforts, we make mistakes. And no mistake is more tragic than the recent murder of Robert Brooks, who sadly lost his life following an assault by staff at the Marcy Correctional Facility. As I'm sure many of you have seen in the videos, the actions of those staff members were repugnant and do not represent our values as an agency. I've always said that individuals go to prison as punishment, not for punishment, and I will not normalize violence within our facilities. The department is moving forward by working closely with prosecutors to hold these individuals accountable and embarking on a cultural transformation focused on accountability, transparency, and integrity. Upon assuming my role as commissioner, I wrote to staff and the incarcerated population to outline my vision for the agency. I told those under our care that I believe in rehabilitation and redemption, and that I believe in them. I committed to find new and innovative ways to harness their lived experiences so that we may tell their story. Their voices and experiences can help educate and shape the future of youth who live in these same neighborhoods, walk the same paths, and have the same struggles as those who became entangled in the criminal justice system, so that they may avoid making those same mistakes. I also challenge those who have found the path to redemption to spread the message amongst their peers. At every graduation ceremony I attend, I challenge each of the graduates to pull their peers from the yard to the classroom so that they may engage in rehabilitative programming and transform themselves. Only together we can reach enough people to achieve systemic change and improve people's lives. We as a department must recognize that we cannot do this work alone. We are fortunate to have a robust network of service providers and volunteers dedicated to providing programming in our facilities. I have committed myself to engage with these organizations and the formerly incarcerated to not only enhance programming, but also offer a message of hope to show that life does not end with incarceration. We have a renewed focus on breaking down barriers for formerly incarcerated to come back to our facilities and engage the population as credible messengers so that they may see that transformation is possible and attainable. There are countless individuals under our care who are doing extraordinary things to transform themselves and their peers every day, whether obtaining their GED, receiving certification in a vocational trade, mentoring younger individuals, or achieving a college degree. It is important that these people are seen and heard so that they may share their journey with those who have walked a similar path and have the same lived experiences. Through this lens, we can begin to change the narrative so that those impacted by the criminal justice system may be defined by the person they are today and the totality of their experiences, rather than the worst mistake of their lives. The department is taking critical steps with the support of the governor, the legislature, and our partners to provide positive incentives to those willing to do the hard work of self-transformation. Governor Hochul's executive budget seeks to grant DOC's authority to make additional programs eligible for earned time benefits, such as merit time and limited credit time allowance, and adds funding to establish job training programs in green energy. These new initiatives will supplement our efforts to expand educational and vocational offerings. Following the restoration of TAP for incarcerated students, college programming continues to expand to additional facilities and students. I have witnessed the power of education firsthand. At one of our college graduations, the valedictorian of the class, who was serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole, delivered a message of hope that his son, who was sitting in the audience, may follow the path he is currently leading, rather than the one that resulted in his incarceration. These stories have an impact you cannot measure, one that breaks the cycles of incarceration that have impacted far too many communities for far too long. The department is also focused heavily on vocational training. We have launched new CDL driver, auto technician, and heavy equipment operator programs, which are in high demand in the community, and are collaborating with the Department of Labor and trade unions to provide industry-recognized credentials and college credits for completion of vocational programming. We hired employment parole officers who are focused on workforce development and connecting releasees with employment. This year, we achieved a recidivism rate less than 19%, which is the lowest rate on record. Which is the lowest rate on record since the department began tracking. Although I prefer to think of this in a more positive light, that over 81% of releasees were successful in the community. That deserves an applause. Better reentry outcomes mean safer streets, less victimization, and reduced incarceration. The department is facing numerous challenges, including learning and growing from our own mistakes. And we shall meet these challenges and the broader challenges that face the criminal justice system and the state of New York. I hope and expect we can count on the continued support of our partners in the Judiciary and Chief Judge Wilson as we move forward and work together to create a fairer and more equitable system and state. Thank you. It is now my honor to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Christopher Martinez, an incarcerated person currently assigned to the Shawangunk Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison in Ulster County. Mr. Martinez is serving a sentence for a crime he committed at the age of 17. But Chris is so much more than his crime and sentence. He's a college graduate, a fellow SUNY alum, I might add. He is a husband, a father, and a role model to his children and his peers. He represents everything I have described here today about the power of redemption and transformation, and I am grateful for his work to better himself and our system. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Christopher Martinez.
Good afternoon. To the esteemed members of the executive, legislative, and judicial branches, and special guests, my name is Christopher Martinez, and I thank you and Commissioner Martisulo for affording me the opportunity to speak and share my story. 29 words. You're a very dangerous person, and you need to be removed from society for a long period of time. And I'm gonna make sure that you are. At my sentencing, those 29 words followed my conviction for murder in the second degree, assault, and weapons possession. I was 17 years old when I committed those crimes, and I was sentenced to 65 years to life, a de facto life without parole sentence. I am still serving my sentence at Shawangunk Correctional Facility. When I was sentenced, I was a high school dropout who never had the chance to vote, obtain a driver's license, serve on a jury panel, or pay taxes. And I may never have those chances. I was born on the bottom of the map and on the last day of the year, Brooklyn's Coney Island Hospital, New Year's Eve, 1984. I was raised in poverty by parents who were addicted to drugs. I was shuffled between 5 homes and attended 7 schools. I was an unknown passenger on the school-to-prison pipeline. I spent some of my childhood in East New York, Brooklyn, which at one point averaged 1 homicide every 63 hours. That's what I knew as a child. But I didn't know I was encountering and interacting in the community as a subject, as a ward of the state through family court and child welfare services. I didn't know stops on the pipeline included the Brooklyn Public Library, 8 colleges, and 1 law school located in Brooklyn. And so I stayed in the pipeline until prison. Was I, a 17-year-old first-time offender, incorrigible? Was I beyond redemption and rehabilitation? What did the judge see in me that made him order a sentence I could not survive? Maturing into adulthood in prison was a dark time for me. The constant exposure to violence, street violence, family violence, prison violence, caused me to turn to violence inwardly. And so at one point I contemplated suicide because I didn't know if I was capable of surviving to see my first parole board in March of 2049. I have now served 23 years of my sentence, and I have spent that time trying to make sense of my punishment, to effect meaning of it. And someone once told me, hope manifests itself as light in the midst of darkness. For me, hope manifested itself in the form of education. In June of 2019, my life changed again, this time with 14 words. Congratulations, Christopher Martinez, you have earned honors roll. Come up and get your degree. On that day, I became a first-generation graduate. And I also became a part of the nearly 3 million SUNY alumni and not merely one of millions of justice impacted in our country. Then in 2023, I went on to earn a bachelor's degree with a concentration in sociology, once again graduating with honors. My son Xavier was 3 years old when I graduated, and while he may not have remembered or understood the graduation, for me it was one of the few times I felt relief from my punishment. Watching him enjoy the moment reminded me of the book of Deuteronomy. The father shall not be put to death for the children, nor shall the children be put to death for the father. And for the first time at my graduation, I felt like my family wasn't being punished for my sins. I have not incurred a single disciplinary infraction in 23 years, and it is not because I'm perfect or follow every single rule, which I think is almost impossible, but instead it's because of mutual respect, because I devoted myself to the idea of redemption and rehabilitation, to proving that I could be a productive member of a community, to proving to others that they could live safely around me. Today, I am one of many creating a new pipeline, a school to prison to college pipeline that serves community interests rather than taxing resources, that stands on the principles of community building through mentorship, restoration, and trust. I do not know if I ever will leave Shawanga, yet every day I work to find meaning and repair the harm I've caused. I remain a devoted husband to my wife, Rebecca, who I love and married 10 years ago. I strive to be the best father I can to my sons, 23-year-old Christopher Jr., 5-year-old Xavier, and 1-year-old Xander. Being able to take these few minutes to explain my journey gives me immeasurable hope, if not for myself, then for others, that New York's motto, Excelsior, ever upward, is possible for all people, all citizens, even those who once committed terrible offenses. I leave you with this. If there be an occasion for you to look at the State Seal, pause for a moment to consider Lady Justice. She holds both a sword and the scales of justice in her hand. I have hope, especially because of today's event, that we can refine how Lady Justice uses her sword, that we can work to redraw the line at imposing punishment that is sufficient but not greater than necessary. Thank you.
It is important to remember that all humans from time to time do something wrong. I sometimes come to the wrong conclusion in the case, which a bunch of these people behind me can attest to. Thankfully, I have them and my law clerks to keep me from most of my mistakes. Mr. Martinez surely did something very wrong, but that isn't the question before us. The question is whether the judge who sentenced Mr. Martinez might have been wrong when he decided that the actions of a 17-year-old required a sentence rendering Mr. Martinez ineligible for release until he was 82 years old. And when we think about the question in a problem-solving way, can we disregard the effect of Mr. Martinez's lifetime incarceration on his children? What is the right outcome now? Thank you, Mr. Martinez. I also want to acknowledge Senator Julia Salazar, whom I mentioned before. I missed her at the beginning. She is, as I mentioned, the Senate sponsor of the Second Look Act. It's now my pleasure to welcome to the podium Mr. Sean Pica, who is president of a nonprofit organization whose business is bringing higher education to men and women incarcerated in New York State prisons and supporting them when they are released. Between refurbishing dilapidated houses in Ossining and driving his white box truck all around New York State to help recently released individuals move into their first apartments, I'm not sure when he has time to sleep. The passion and joy with which Mr. Pica approaches his work of serving incarcerated people, for him is deeply personal. For a crime he committed at age 16, he was sentenced to 24 years in prison, of which he served 16. I present Mr. Sean Pica, who will introduce our next speaker.
I just want to point out that Christopher's first time in his life wearing a suit today, and you look fantastic, brother. My name is Sean Pica. I'm the president of Hudson Link for Higher Education in Prison. Hudson Link brings associate's and bachelor degree programs to men and women in the New York State Department of Corrections. Our students do the same coursework, the same textbooks, the same professors as on a traditional campus. The only difference is they have to work so much harder. Anyone that has a dream of going to college can do it with Hudson Link. We don't screen out people based on a crime or the time. I thought for sure you were going to clap at that moment. Let me try that one more time. The only degree-granting college program in the country, in a prison, run and staffed by formerly incarcerated people. The results have been stunning. We currently have over 650 students enrolled in 5 correctional facilities across the entire state of New York. Nearly 2,000 alumni have a recidivism rate of less than 2% compared to the estimated 68% across the country. That number is heartbreaking. 68% of the men and women across the country that get released from prison return to prison in the first 3 years. We have a less than 2% recidivism rate. We will not rest till it is a 100% success rate. Over the last 26 years, Hudson Link has been grown in the number of services it provides, no longer just college. Our Finish Line program supports alumni interested in completing their degree or continuing on to graduate degrees after release. Through our New Beginnings initiative, we purchased and renovated dilapidated houses within the community, all walking distance to our main headquarters right in Ossining, right behind Sing Sing. Hudson Link has operated transitional housing, returning alumni. All of this is free of charge. Hudson Link alumni are engaged in the renovation of these properties, working side by side with the other trade professionals. To gain real work experience, we just opened our 4th home. I will also just point out that the college has been going on for 27 years. The construction and housing initiative is only a few years old, but it was my undergrad thesis project that I wrote while living at Sing Sing on a manual typewriter. It's so real back for our students to see this is not just college. These are real-life programs that are impacting life every single day. Hudson Link's success has been deeply personal to me. When I was 16 years old, I was sentenced to 24 years in prison, and I believed my life was over. Along with 15 other students at Sing Sing, I got my degree in 2001 through a small program called Hudson Link. I had no idea that one day I'd be the president of that same company. "70% of our staff are formerly incarcerated. They sat in those seats, and like Christopher, will one day be home and run the program with us." It is my privilege to now introduce to you a very special Hudson Link graduate, Mr. Mujahideen Muhammad, who returned home just 10 months ago. I first met him when he was still a student, still incarcerated. I knew from the very beginning when I met him that he would be successful. Though he's only been home 10 months, every time I speak with him, he's running a program, he's filming something for college, he's back in school, he's getting word back into these prisons about the important work that's happening boots on the ground at these campuses every single day. Being a college student is challenging even in the best of circumstances, and the challenges are far greater when you're in a maximum security prison. A block at Sing Sing is the single largest cell block in the country. If you think college is challenging, try it while living there. But Mr. Muhammad always worked so hard, above and beyond the curve. On his coursework, he did not just end there. He was always a leader within that place. Now, if you think of college students being leaders, it makes perfect sense. But college students and leaders and going above and beyond are not generally what you hear about of men that live at Sing Sing. He never stopped, and all I could think about was he was not going to graduate alone. He made sure that everyone that was going on that journey with him would be right alongside him. I proudly introduce Mr. Mujahideen.
Good afternoon. My name is Mujahideen Muhammad. I am here today to tell you about my experience spending 2/3 of my life incarcerated. I'll start at the beginning. Drug addiction and mental illness plagued my family. When I was young, my father abandoned me, my mother and 2 sisters. Then my mother abandoned us too for 5 years as she struggled with drug addiction. I developed a conduct disorder due in large part to my lack of attachment to a caregiver. At 14, I was arrested for attempted robbery and sentenced to 12 months in a juvenile residential facility. My values were so poor that I turned a 12-month sentence into a 4-year stay. I spent my last year in Harlem Valley Juvenile Residential Facility, where I spent 9 months in an isolation unit because of my unruly behavior. It was one of the darkest periods of my life because I adapted to being distant from others. My regard for myself and for other people plummeted. When I was released, it was only because I was sentenced as a juvenile, so when I turned 18, the institution could no longer lawfully hold me. Thus, I was released into society more prone to committing crime than I was before. A year later, at the age of 19, I was arrested for murder and sentenced to 25 years to life. While awaiting trial and reconciling, I fell into great despair and lost all hope. I soon started to lose a grip on my mental health. Over the next several years, I was hospitalized on 3 occasions. My turning point was 2014. By then, I had been in prison for 15 years, and I finally reached the point where I was completely dissatisfied with myself. So I decided to better myself by pursuing a higher education. I had displayed academic excellence when I was young, but my behavioral issues and values kept me from realizing my educational potential. In 2017, while at Sing Sing Correctional Facility, I entered Hudson Link's Mercer University College program. 6 years later, I graduated with a bachelor's degree in behavioral science. I was the salutatorian with a 3.98 GPA. Thank you. Thank you. 6 months later, I entered New York Theological Seminary and graduated in June 2024 with a master's degree in professional studies of urban ministry. I had a 4.0 GPA. Because of my participation in positive programs and my educational achievements, I made my first parole board in December 2023. I was released from Sing Sing in April 2024 after spending 24.5 years in prison. 2 months later, I walked back into Sing Sing as a visitor, a free man, to graduate with my cohorts and my master's program. In addition to its intrinsic value, my education prepared me for release in a way I hadn't anticipated. It connected me to a community of support. Hudson Link accepted me into their transitional housing in Ossining, and I benefited from the help of their wonderful staff and wraparound services. 2 weeks into my reentry, my college English professor, Mickey Shaw, got me my first job at a mushroom farm in Peekskill. A month into my release, my former psychology professor, Dr. Geraldine Downey, hired me as a research assistant at the Center for Justice at Columbia University, where I still work today. The first task Dr. Downey gave me was to research and write a report about the pending Second Look Act, an assignment that overjoyed me. The research became an outlet for my survivor's guilt and the tremendous empathy I felt for the good men with excessive sentences whom I left behind in Sing Sing. I spent this entire speech talking about myself, but I hope that you all see that my story is bigger than me. My story shows what's possible when we invest in our incarcerated population, no matter how grave the crimes they once committed. An idea I believe so passionately in, I created a nonprofit organization called the Pillars of Promise, which consists of formerly incarcerated individuals who are committed to promoting positive images of incarcerated people to the public and raising awareness about what makes them deserving of second chances. I am one of many, many formerly incarcerated men and women who have successfully transitioned back into society. Today I work at Columbia University, an Ivy League school, after being convicted of an A1 felony. I, like so many other formerly incarcerated people, am proof that we could be put in trustworthy positions and help improve our communities and society overall. My one hope is that the success of the formerly incarcerated population becomes more apparent so that the wider public can support the idea of granting second chances. Thank you.
When listening to Mr. Muhammad, I wondered how I would have turned out if I'd had his childhood instead of the loving and nurturing one that I actually had. Then when I recalled that there was only 1 year in my life, 9th grade, when I had a GPA as high as Mr. Muhammad's, I began to wonder instead where he would have been now if he'd had my childhood. I fully expect we will all see great things from him now that he's found his way through the education that DOCS afforded him. Thank you, Mr. Pica and Mr. Muhammad.
Thank you.
Now, I'd like to invite Dr. Geraldine Downey to the podium. As you heard in Mr. Muhammad's remarks, she has been an important teacher and supporter in his life, and she's here to introduce another one of her remarkable students.
I'm truly honored to be here on this historic occasion, and thanks to everybody who made it possible. I'm a professor of psychology at Columbia University, as you've already heard, but I'm also the co-founder of the Center for Justice. I co-founded it with Cheryl Wilkins and Kathy Boudin, whom I met when I was a teacher at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. The Center invests in people impacted by incarceration. We provide pathways to college, to careers, and to opportunities to become change agents, positive change agents in communities. Many of my colleagues at the Center, including Mujahideen, who just spoke, and Jarrell, who you'll hear from next, first met me in college classrooms and prisons. And in those classrooms, many of the students ask, what would have kept us from giving up on our dreams and going out down the path that led us to prison? Jarrell's answer, developed during his incarceration, led to Project Restore Bed-Stuy, a program that had all the elements that he believed were needed to prevent young people like him from getting involved with gun and gang violence. When Jarrell came home, he enlisted Nigel Farina, the prosecutor in his case, to help shape the program. He invited Nigel to be part of Justice Ambassadors, as some other people in this audience had also the pleasure of being. And together, Nigel and Jarrell persuaded Brooklyn DA Eric Gonzalez that such an investment would both decrease community violence and decrease incarceration. The tougher challenge was getting young street crew members to take a chance on the program. When Jarrell explained that they get paid to participate, that got their attention. But what really got their investment was Jarrell's story of spending 6 years in prison and coming home and earning a degree from Columbia University. In their slice of Bed-Stuy, going to prison was normalized, even glorified. But Jarrell was the first person who explained what prison was really like and why he had come home committed to transforming himself and his entire community. At first, they thought he was far too good to be true, but over time, they saw that he was the real deal. Today, a third of the Project Restore graduates are in college. Shootings in the neighborhood are way down, and former rivals are working together to keep the peace. They attribute their transformation to Jarrell, and also to the other formerly incarcerated team members of Project Restore. Many of the Project Restore team had earned a second chance while in prison, and some of them had never expected to come home. Today, they are beacons of light for young people in their communities, and together they show what's possible when people are given a second chance. So it's now with appreciation that I introduce my colleague and inspiration, Gerald Daniels.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gerald Daniels. I'm a community organizer and PhD student. I stand before you today with great gratitude and a deep sense of reflection, humbled by my journey that has brought me from incarceration to academia. As a teenager, I grew up in a neighborhood plagued by poverty and violence in the South Bronx. At 15, I was initiated into a gang and involved myself in a cycle of violence. I dropped out of school and dedicated my life to the streets. And just 3 years later, I had my wake-up call. At 18, when I was charged with a near-fatal shooting and a 10-man gang indictment alongside several of my friends who I grew up with. And I just want to pause for a second and say that no amount of good deeds or things that we've done since coming home will make up for the harm that we've caused to the families, to the people who've been impacted by our actions. We just hope that the second chances that we've gotten is a way for us to pay it forward. But again, nothing that we have done or will do will make up for the harm that we've caused. For many of us, our destiny seemed etched in stone, from poverty to the precinct to the courtroom and ultimately a prison cell. But I know now that that path is not immutable. Even amid the chaos and dysfunction of Rikers Island, I managed to get my GED after 2 months of being held without bail. This was the first step I took towards changing. The second was the advice I received from elders, men who had been sentenced to life in prison, essentially a death sentence. It was these men who became my mentors, my father figures, and it was these men who helped me become the person that I am today. And although they held on to little hope that they would be released, they still had goals and plans for their future. They wanted to be college graduates, business owners, and nonprofit executives. But most importantly, they wanted to be good husbands and fathers to their children. They wanted to be mentors to younger men like me. But from inside prison walls, they were creating their own second chances by being something more than a convicted felon. Another critical step in my transformation came just a few weeks before my release, when I got to meet Dr. Geraldine Downey, who invited me to participate in my first college course. It was called Inside Criminal Justice, or ICJ as we call it. This wasn't just merely a class, it was a lifeline. It was a rope, and it was a gateway to new possibilities. It was a challenge for me to rethink my identity and life purpose. ICJ was a unique college course that brought incarcerated students together with prosecutors from the Manhattan DA's office. And this course changed my perspective on the criminal justice system. Through our candid conversations and shared experiences, my fellow classmates and I uncovered the need for criminal legal system reform and ultimately inspiring the work towards policy change and youth empowerment. In Dr. Downey's class, I learned how to question the systems that shaped my life, and I saw higher education as not just an escape route, but as a powerful tool to rebuild my identity and contribute meaningfully to society. As I prepared for my release, I filled the pages of my 16 composition notebooks with my plans to support my reintegration back into society. The important thing was continuing my higher education journey. So when I was released, I immediately enrolled in community college and eventually transferred to the School of General Studies at Columbia University to earn my bachelor's. And I did. And along the way, I founded the Justice Ambassadors Youth Council with guidance from Dr. Downey and her mentorship. The Ambassadors Program, similar to Inside Criminal Justice, and brings young people, some who've already been arrested or incarcerated, together with government executives to co-create policy solutions to address some of our public crises like gun violence and homelessness. In our class, we brainstorm ideas about improving the lives of our city's most vulnerable youth before they get trapped within our criminal legal system. And now, as a doctoral student at New York University studying psychology, my contributions to society have shifted to evaluating public safety approaches like the Project Restore gang intervention we piloted last year in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. My goal is to develop evidence-based programs that integrate education, mentorship, trauma healing, and career pathways for at-risk youth to break the cycles of poverty and violence. But no matter where you start in life, the opportunity to create a new story for yourself should always be within reach. I urge you all to support efforts and legislation that invest in incarcerated people, acknowledge transformation, and to create meaningful pathways for people to reintegrate back into their communities and to redefine their futures. These efforts serve not just people who are incarcerated, but also are part of a shared vision for humanity and the future of our communities. Redemption is possible. I am living proof that about the transformative power of higher education and second chances. I plan to spend the rest of my life paying it forward, and I hope you will join me in this mission. Thank you.
Something that Mr. Daniels said has been said to be by many incarcerated people. Some of the people serving very long sentences in New York prisons have transformed themselves and are working inside the prison to aid others, even though they themselves have no hope of release. Those on the inside know exactly who those people are. Mr. Daniels, as he told you, was aided and guided by some of those people who, in a sense, are showing the purest form of altruism. The question is whether, like Mr. Daniels, they should have a chance to prove that they can do even more good on the outside. Thank you, Dr. Downey and Mr. Daniels. I'm going to invite Commissioner Marticello back to the podium to introduce our final guest.
Hello again. So again, I have the distinct honor to introduce our next speaker, Ms. Tammy Eldridge, an incarcerated woman currently assigned to the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison in Westchester County. Again, Ms. Eldridge is currently serving a sentence of incarceration within our system, but she too is much more than her worst mistake. She's a person that has found the path to programs, earning multiple college degrees, launching innovative programs that have a positive impact on her peers. She's a mother and continues to support her children regardless of where she lives. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Eldridge.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Tammy Eldridge. I am 51 years old, and I am currently incarcerated at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. I have been incarcerated for the past 25 years. I was born and raised in Queens, New York. My mother and father separated when I was very young. I lived with my mother, but my father's house was my refuge from my mother's physical and mental abuse. When I was 15, my father was sentenced to 10 years on drug charges. Without his protection, my mother threw me out of the house, and I became homeless. From sleeping on friends' couches to park benches and train cars, I knew I couldn't continue living this way. I looked to education. I signed up for Job Corps, got my GED, and job training. I was off to a new start, but then my life took an unexpected and completely derailed. My brother was brutally murdered. He was sodomized, choked, and fatally stabbed with a screwdriver. He was 7 years old. I felt more pain and anger because of his murder than words can ever describe. Soon after, my mother got sick with breast cancer. I moved back to Queens to care for her. And in the midst of all of this, I discovered I was pregnant with my first daughter. When my mother died, I used my rent money to pay for her cremation. My daughter was 5 months old, and I was 22 years old. My second daughter was born 2 years later. I tried to support us, but I couldn't make ends meet. I didn't realize it then, but I was living in a state of all-out crises. We were getting constantly evicted, moving in and out of shelters, and eventually sleeping on my aunt's floor. So I left New York. I brought my daughters to Louisiana, and I started over. And we were on a path to a better life. But then, my then boyfriend's legal troubles brought us back to New York. Coming back was supposed to be temporary, but I can feel us getting stuck again. In an act of total panic and desperation of wanting to get my children and my life back to our new life in Louisiana, I took someone's life. To this day, it is an act I regret with all my being. I personally know the pain of losing someone, my brother, to murder. Knowing I caused the pain in others is indescribable. I destroyed my victim's life, my own life, and the lives of so many other people. And I still do not forgive myself. I carried my fear and anger into the courtroom and into prison. I got into arguments with the judge and serious fights with other inmates. My anger became a plague. I was arrested over 27 times in prison. I spent a collective 13 years in the box, solitary confinement. Being incarcerated for over 2 decades forced me to confront my anger and to grieve my mother and brother. It has forced me to be still and think about who I wanted to be in this world. 12 years ago, I decided to stop getting in trouble and be a role model worthy of my daughter's love. I decided to get the education I had always wanted. I realized that I was my own worst enemy, and I needed to let my anger go. And I did. It was the turning point in my life. In 2017, I earned an associate's degree in liberal arts from Marymount Manhattan College. In 2023, I earned a bachelor's degree from Marymount in sociology. In 2024, I earned my master's degree from New York Theological Seminary in professional studies. Thank you. Now, I am currently pursuing my second master's degree in business and administration so I can help my older daughter with her small business she just recently started and share my knowledge with those in my community to encourage them to start their own businesses upon release. In addition to going to school, I have devoted myself entirely to building a college community at Bedford Hills. I have served as a teacher's assistant for several undergraduate classes and as a mentor for women pursuing their master's degrees. I recently started building a library and a resource center for the master's degree program, and I am also a teacher teaching a horticulture class to new mothers and babies at Bedford Nursery. I am teaching them how to eat healthily, how to grow, harvest, and prepare fruits and vegetables to feed their babies. Something I'm really proud of, though, is in 2016, I started and founded a STEP team. STEP is a unique dance rooted in African culture where dancers use their body to create rhythms and sounds. My STEP team gives discipline, structure, community, and pride to the college students at Bedford Hills. That's the important part. You need to be in college to be a part of my STEP team. For those who want to go to college and be a stepper, but don't yet have their GEDs, I created a tutoring group named the Judith Circle, a group of undergraduate students and alumni who give up their weekends to help women prepare for the GED. I named it the Judith Circle after my friend Judith Johnson, who was diligent and determined to get her GED, but tragically, she committed suicide last year, 10 years into a 20-year sentence. I wish I could do this work on the outside, out in society. I know that I might never leave Bedford Hills, but others will. And so I help everyone I can get signed up for school. I help the other women at Bedford work on turning their lives around and being prepared to go home. But most importantly, I help them become the best versions of themselves. My favorite author, Viktor Frankl, wrote that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Although my body is not free, my soul is free. For I am choosing my own way in a place where I was sent to die. I choose to do things to try to repair the harm that I have caused and to love my daughters and to lift up others. Thank you for hearing my truth.
Miss Eldridge loves literature. Her favorite poem is Invictus, written in 1875 by William Ernest Henley. The poem was also a favorite of Nelson Mandela's during his 27 years of incarceration. Because it captures something special about each of today's guests, I thought I would read it to you. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody, but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Thank you, Ms. Eldridge.
Thank you.
In a few minutes, Mr. Martinez and Ms. Eldridge will return to prison. I should also let you know that until yesterday afternoon, they had no idea they would be here in person. For their own security, they were told they would be presenting their remarks via video from prison. Can you even imagine what their experience today must be like? What it would be like to be whisked from decades of imprisonment to the New York State Court of Appeals to speak to all of you. What do you think they might have felt? Terror, anxiety, awe, joy, grief? Try as I might, I cannot imagine what they must have felt, whether that was as they were told they would be coming in person, or when they arrived, when they listened, when they spoke, or what they will feel when they are back in their cells. I did get a very small idea of what they might be feeling relayed to me by my Chief of Staff, Kelsey Rocher-Enkeball, who met repeatedly with each of our speakers and is largely responsible for the content of today's program. Ms. Eldridge told Kelsey that the experience of trying on civilian clothes for the first time in decades in preparation for her video appearance was completely overwhelming, and that she has been trying to process what it means to wear a suit while incarcerated with no end in sight, and what it will feel like to have to take off her suit and turn it in this evening. She told Kelsey that she ultimately decided to embrace the clothing so that her daughters could have one happy memory of her in real clothes. Even with that bit of insight, I don't know what this day feels like to Mr. Martinez or Ms. Eldridge. But I do know what I want them to feel: hope. Hope not just for themselves, and maybe not even mostly for themselves, but for all those who, like them, are not the same person convicted of a terrible crime many years ago. I want them to feel that speaking to this august audience gives them hope that will fortify them to continue their good works for the rest of their lives. I want that hope to spread as they tell other incarcerated people about today. And I believe that hope is genuine, not chimerical, because those of you here in person, those watching remotely, and those who will watch later are the people who can make their hope reality. Last year, I left you with 5 happy endings. This year is a bit more melancholic. 2 happy beginnings and 2 challenges. What we are doing is not the best we can do. I know that. Commissioner Marticello knows that. And I believe all of you know that too. We can do better. Won't we? Thank you all for your attendance. And almost all of you are free to leave.